join hand with the Notorious. Every day at Awakened Academy is hell for me. My regeneration ability should be a blessing, an S-rank power, but it's my curse. When Min-jun and his friends beat me with their abilities, my body heals itself, but the pain is unbearable. I've learned to muffle my screams while they laugh. I can't report them. What proof do I have when my wounds vanish minutes later? Besides, the administration protects special ability users like Min-jun, Hyunwoo, and Tae-min. The government values their combat potential too much to punish them for tormenting someone like me. I endure it all for Mom. Since Dad died when I was 5, she sacrificed everything for me. My dream isn't fancy. Graduate, become a C-rank hunter, and finally give her the comfortable life she deserves. That's all I want. Today is Mom's birthday. I saved for weeks to buy her favorite cake from the bakery across town. I should have never left her alone. When I reached the hospital, the doctor said, "Accident." But I knew better as soon as I saw the crystal fragments they'd removed during surgery. Min-jun had been there. The nurses whispered about 3 young ability users visiting her restaurant. I fled the hospital and found myself alone in an alley, slamming my fist into the wall until my knuckles shattered. My ability kicked in immediately. Bones realigning, tissue regenerating, and the familiar wave of agony washed over me. But this pain was nothing compared to what consumed my heart. Through my tears, I overheard a group of students talking about Min-jun and his friends celebrating at their usual mountain spot. I knew exactly where. When I arrived, they were laughing, toasting with stolen liquor. Min-jun was mimicking my mother's surprise when his crystal pierced her abdomen. "Why?" I managed to ask, my voice breaking. "Why her?" They turned, startled at first, then amused. Hyunwoo snickered. "We saw the family photo in her wallet. She looked too young to be a mother. We were curious." Something inside me snapped. I lunged at Min-jun, but he was ready. A crystal spear formed in his hand and drove through my chest. The pain was blinding, but I pulled it out and kept moving forward as my flesh knitted itself back together in agonizing waves. "What's wrong with you?" Min-jun shouted, creating more crystal spears that pinned me to the ground. I ripped them out one by one, stumbling to my feet despite the torment of regeneration. "Hyunwoo, hit him," Min-jun commanded. Lightning struck me from above, my muscles seizing as electricity coursed through my body. I collapsed, smelling my own burnt flesh as it began to heal. They turned to leave, thinking I was finished. With the last of my strength, I grabbed Min-jun's ankle. "Where do you think you're going?" The beating that followed was brutal. Min-jun's fists reduced my face to pulp, but each time my features reconstructed themselves, I reached for him again. "This freak won't stay down," Min-jun shouted. "Tae-min, do something." They worked together then. Min-jun created a crystal sphere around me, while Tae-min reinforced it with hardened sand. I pounded against the transparent walls as they buried my prison deep underground. The air grew thin. Darkness closed in. I lost consciousness repeatedly, only for my regeneration to force me awake into renewed suffering. In those moments between, I saw Mom's face. I remembered her final smile when I left to buy her cake. I thought about how helpless she must have felt when Min-jun attacked her. I began striking the crystal barrier methodically, unconcerned with time or pain. Each impact weakened the structure slightly. Eventually, it would break, and so would they. 5 years passed. Today, I watch them on the television in a dingy motel room. The famous trio of ability users, national heroes now. The interviewer delicately mentions rumors about a tragic accident from their past. Min-jun's perfect tears glisten in the studio lights. "It was the mother of my dear friend," he says, voice carefully modulated for maximum sympathy. "I lost control of my abilities in a terrible moment I regret every day. I've searched for my friend to apologize personally, but haven't been able to locate him." I turn off the television and flex my hand. The changes that began in that crystal prison have transformed me completely. 5 years of focusing my regeneration, of understanding what truly makes me special. I focus on the massive metal doors at the front of the hall, feeling their structure, their weight. With a thought, they tear from their hinges, sailing toward the stage where Minjun sits, his false tears drying as recognition dawns in his eyes. It's time to reunite with my old friend. The doors should have crushed Minjun, but he hardens his arms with his crystal ability and stops them mid-flight. The audience erupts in panic, stampeding toward the exits while I stride through the main entrance. I move faster than I ever could before. One moment I'm at the door, the next my fist connects with Minjun's face, sending him flying across the auditorium. The satisfaction I feel seeing his body tumble through the air is indescribable. I finally got out, I announce, my voice unrecognizable even to myself. I'm wearing my pain now, a suit of bones that grew from within me, an exoskeleton forged through years of suffering. They stare at me, uncomprehending. I tell them about the diamond prison, how I spent years punching the crystal without knowing how much time had passed, how I nearly died countless times from lack of air, food, and water. But my regeneration kept me alive, though each revival brought torment beyond description. What they never understood about my ability, what I never understood until they buried me, was that each regeneration made the injured part stronger than before. Every punch against the unyielding crystal broke my hands. Every regeneration reinforced my bones. Over time, my exoskeleton began to visibly develop, my body transforming through agony into something new. For 5 years, I endured. My body destroyed and reborn daily, growing stronger with every injury. I never stopped punching until I finally broke free. Hyunwoo and Taemin can't process what they're seeing. I know I look more monster than human now, my entire body armored with a bone exoskeleton. Their eyes dart between each other, confusion evident. They don't even recognize me. I remember what they told me 5 years ago, how they laughed when they said I could try escaping if I wanted. The memory fuels my rage as I advance toward them. Minjun rises from behind, shouting orders. "Finish that monster!" Hyunwoo responds immediately, calling down a lightning bolt that strikes me directly. In the past, this would have left me unconscious. Now, I barely feel it. The surprise on his face is almost comical as I rush toward him, extending the blade that's grown from my forearm. One clean slice and his head separates from his body. Minjun and Taemin watch in horror as their friend collapses, dead, before he hits the ground. Taemin finally reacts, trapping me inside a sphere of compressed earth. I almost laugh. After the crystal prison, this feels like being wrapped in tissue paper. I flex my enhanced muscles, and the prison shatters into 1,000 pieces. Before Taemin can form another defense, I grab him by the jaw. His eyes widen as I continue chewing my gum casually. With one powerful motion, I rip his jaw clean off. Blood fountains as he falls, shock and agony rendering him speechless. To end his suffering, I bring my bone blade down in a swift, merciful strike. Minjun stands behind me now. I can sense his fear as I turn to face him. He attacks first, diamond fist connecting with my face. The impact would have killed me before, but now his diamonds crack against my exoskeleton. Desperation fills his eyes as he summons massive crystal spears, large enough to fill the entire building. Just like 5 years ago, he pins me down with countless spikes through my body. He stares at what he believes is my corpse, but my limbs begin to twitch. I stand once more, my body completely covered in blood. The terror on his face is palpable. Minjun encases himself in diamond armor, transforming his fists into sledgehammers. He attacks relentlessly, each hit cracking both his diamonds and my bones, blood spraying with every impact. He finishes with a powerful blow to my head. Just like when we were teenagers, I grab his fist with my mouth. But this time, instead of breaking my teeth, I shatter his arm. His shock is total as I bite down harder, simultaneously driving my skeletal sword through his chest. He tries desperately to escape, but I maintain my grip until his arm separates from his body. He summons a large diamond stalagmite in defense, but it's useless. As he stumbles backward, I throw his own diamond spear, impaling him against the wall. I approach slowly while he screams for mercy. Revenge is all I can think about as I stab him repeatedly with his own diamond spikes, leaving him weak and bleeding. "Who are you?" he manages to ask through bloody lips. I remove the skull-like mask that my face has become. Recognition dawns in his eyes. "Is it really Worm?" he whispers, using the old nickname they tormented me with. I ignore the insult and strike him once more before grabbing his throat. With deliberate slowness, I drive my skeletal sword up through his mouth and out the back of his head, watching as the light fades from his eyes. With my revenge complete, my rage finally subsides. I look around at the destruction, 3 bodies in pools of blood, the auditorium in ruins, and me, the lone survivor. The only movement is my reflection rippling in the crimson puddles at my feet. A gray cloud covers the building, and rain begins to fall. I collapse to my knees, feeling the water flow over my grotesque form. After 5 years of endless suffering, I release a primal scream that echoes through the empty hall. What happens next? I have no idea. Sometime later, I find myself in a hospital, wrapped in a warm blanket that feels foreign against my hardened skin. I stare at the person lying on the bed, unable to comprehend what I'm seeing. My mother is still alive. Meanwhile, somewhere far away under a bright blue sky, a portal to another world opens in a forest. Through it, I can somehow see a dark green cave where hunters are completing their mission. 4 men praise a young woman for her performance, telling her how well she did venturing so deep into the portal for the first time. She thanks them for their support, but suddenly freezes in terror as she notices their expressions changing. Predatory gleams in their eyes as they surround her. The men grin, telling her they're even more thankful than she is. They remind her that no one outside knows what happens inside the portal. I don't understand why I'm seeing this vision, but a familiar feeling stirs within me. Perhaps my purpose isn't finished after all. The girl trembled in fear as rough hands seized her wrists, a muscular man sneering as he traced his fingers across her face. "We'll be stuck here for a month," he chuckled, his breath hot against her skin. "I can't wait to spend that time with you." As he leaned in closer, his tongue about to graze her cheek, his head was suddenly severed from his body, rolling onto the ground with a sickening thud. Blood sprayed across the stunned faces of the remaining hunters as they spun around, trying to locate the attacker. The girl remained frozen, her wide eyes locked on the monstrous figure that had appeared before her. Towering over them, its form was covered in a hard, gleaming exoskeleton, a predator among men. Me. The 3 hunters didn't hesitate. One conjured fire, hurling a blazing inferno in my direction. Another forged a spear of darkness, its sharp edges dripping with malice. The last, a samurai, gripped his sword with trained precision, ready for a fight. The fire and darkness struck me first. The flames licked at my skin, the shadows curled around my limbs, but neither left more than a fleeting mark on my armor. The samurai lunged, thrusting his blade deep into my chest. A sharp snap echoed through the air. His sword had shattered on impact. I struck back with ruthless efficiency. My claws tore through his throat, his body collapsing lifelessly to the floor. The remaining 2 stumbled backward, the realization of their powerlessness dawning in their terrified eyes. They had underestimated the nightmare lurking in the portal. Without hesitation, I ended them both. their heads rolling beside their fallen comrade. Only the girl remained. She sobbed, her fragile body trembling as she whispered words of gratitude. But I didn't respond. I simply observed. And when she tried to calm herself, when she tried to believe she had been saved, I struck again. Her head fell, her lifeless body crumpling beside the others. Why? To understand, one must go back to the days before blood coated my hands. I had wept in the ruined auditorium, surrounded by corpses I had personally cut down. A voice echoed through the silence, calm yet laced with amusement. "How does it feel?" it asked. "Revenge?" A blonde woman stood at the doorway, unshaken by the carnage. "Who are you?" I demanded, my voice hoarse with rage. "Sim John," she introduced herself, "leader of South Korea's Hunter Association, and I've been watching you for 5 years. 5 years. Since my mother." Rage flared anew, the building trembling as I launched myself at her. But before my claws could reach, she uttered a single sentence. "I can save your mother." My entire being froze mid-attack, the force of my halted momentum tearing cracks into the walls. "Explain," I growled. She did. Jan was no ordinary healer. She possessed the rare ability to revive the unconscious. My mother, whom I thought lost forever, was still alive, because Jan had kept her that way. While I had rotted underground, my mother had been clinging to life. Doubt gnawed at me, but Jan didn't waver. "South Korea is at risk," she said. "Other nations grow stronger, and our hunters are outmatched. War is inevitable. But you, Jung, you're different. You can eliminate threats without causing political turmoil." "A monster like me? Their secret weapon. Help us," she offered, "and I will return your mother to you." It was a choice that had already been made. The hunters I had just slain? The first of my targets. Across the sea, in Japan, another meeting was unfolding. Inside a sleek glass building, the Japanese Prime Minister sat with his hands folded, his gaze drilling into the younger Defense Minister. "Are there strong monsters in the gates?" "No." "Does South Korea have powerful hunters?" "No." The Prime Minister's fist slammed against the table, veins bulging with fury. "Then why have we not taken the peninsula yet?" His frustration found its way to the Defense Minister, a man named Akosa Kajuru, Japan's strongest hunter. "I will handle it personally," Kajuru said, a confident smirk on his lips. Hours later, he entered a portal where his finest hunters had vanished. Weak monsters attacked, but he cut through them like paper, knowing they weren't the ones responsible. When he reached the end of the cave, he found the remains of his men stacked in a grotesque pile. Sitting atop them was me. His fury ignited in an instant. His blade slashed toward me, but I caught it effortlessly. He dodged my counter, pushing me back with a powerful strike. The force of his first attack, First Moon, made me take a step back. His second moon, slammed me into the cave wall. Yet I endured. Then he came at me with Third Moon. This time I dodged. My claws lashed toward him, my skeletal sword aiming for his throat. He reversed his katana at the last second, severing my arm instead. With a calm breath, he raised his blade. "This sword cuts through anything," he murmured. The next thing I knew, my head rolled to the floor. Darkness crept in. Yet, in that fading moment, memory surfaced. My father, his warm laughter, the way he rushed to save me from an oncoming truck, shoving me aside only to meet his own end, the headlights illuminating his last expression. After he died, life became a cruel battle. My mother's hands, once soft, hardened from relentless labor. She said she was fine, but I heard her quiet sobs at night. I blamed myself. I thought I didn't deserve to live. One night, with shaking hands, I took a box cutter to my wrist. I didn't expect my mother to find me. Didn't expect her to drop the dinner tray in horror. Didn't expect my wound to heal instantly. I stared at my hands, realization dawning. I had awakened, The television played an interview with Korea's top hunter, Yong Gang. I clung to my mother, making a silent promise. I would become like him. I would make things right, but reality had different plans. And so, as I lay decapitated in that cave, the monster I had become, I wondered, was this the end of my story, or merely the beginning? Years had passed, and the woman remained in a coma at the hospital. The memory lingered in Jian's mind, though it no longer held much significance. His conversation with Jae Yun had been far more important, the discussion of how the world had shifted, with hunters becoming the dominant force. Japan, in particular, posed a significant threat, and Jian had been chosen as the weapon to counter them. His confrontation with Japan's top hunter, Kajuru, had taken an unexpected turn. Even with his head severed, Jian's body did not accept death. The dismembered head moved on its own, inching toward Kajuru. The hunter remained deep in thought, unaware until teeth sank into his leg. Staggering back in shock, he saw Jian's skeleton regenerating from the severed head. Without hesitation, Kajuru slashed at Jian's face, freeing himself and preparing for a real battle. A crescent moon-shaped glow emerged on Kajuru's forehead. Without wasting another moment, he unleashed his strongest technique, Deadly 12th Moon. The force of his rapid slashes shredded Jian's form, the destruction extending from the depths of the cave to the surrounding forest. The terrain bore the scars of their fight, walls and ground marked by the sheer power unleashed. Though victorious, Kajuru himself was not unscathed, his injuries severe enough to warrant immediate treatment. Before he could seek it, however, a skeletal hand burst forth from the rubble, a sharpened bone spike piercing through his leg. He turned in disbelief to see Jian's fragmented body still pulling itself together. Determined not to let the monster fully recover, Kajuru tightened his grip on his katana and charged forward. Days later, hunters gathered outside the Japanese gate, where Prime Minister Judo oversaw the operation. Kajuru had been missing for 3 days, prompting concerns. Their patience wore thin as something finally emerged, Kajuru's severed head rolling onto the ground. A skeletal figure followed, stepping out of the portal. Before anyone could react, Judo's head was separated from his shoulders in an instant. In South Korea, Jae-yoon and her assistant monitored the unfolding chaos. The assistant expressed doubts about sending Jian to Japan, considering the significance of Judo's son's demise. Jae-yoon, however, seemed unfazed, merely posing a question. Who would prevail, a regenerating monster or Japan's strongest hunter? Back at the battlefield, Judo's body did not remain still for long. The severed head reattached itself seamlessly, and molten fists crashed into Jian, generating an explosion that sent him flying. The aftermath left him unconscious. Judo stood tall, magma dripping from his knuckles, his injuries vanishing rapidly. Unlike ordinary hunters, Judo was an SS-rank combatant, his abilities placing him beyond human limitations. 3 years had passed since most of the world's monsters had been exterminated, leaving hunters as the dominant force. Their unchecked power instilled fear in governments, leading some nations to attempt eliminating them. The efforts had proven futile. Instead, governments reached compromises, or, in some cases, hunters overthrew them entirely. Japan belonged to the latter category. The reason was simple. Rocky Judo, an aggressive and ambitious figure, had seized control. Even before awakening as a hunter, he had clawed his way to power, his goal fixed on annexing South Korea. That plan had been disrupted when Jian emerged. Despite taking a direct hit, Jian's regeneration allowed him to stand once more. Judo's subordinates moved in, convinced they could eliminate the problem. One hunter attempted to decapitate him, but lost his own head instead. Another was crushed under Jian's unrelenting grip. The remaining hunters hesitated as Jian stood without a single visible wound. Judo, furious, issued a warning. Anyone who failed him would die by his hands. Stepping forward, Judo's mind drifted to a memory. A snowy day when he encountered a frail boy on the streets. He had asked the child's name and received the response, Kajuru. Years had passed, and the boy had become a trusted ally, only to be slain by the monster standing before him. Rage boiled over. Juto unleashed a barrage of molten fists, reducing Jian to scattered bones. Yet, as he had already seen, Jian refused to die. The bones pulled together, piecing the creature back into shape. Judo's fury deepened. He had fought and sacrificed to make Japan the strongest nation. Kajuru had even asked once if he could call him father, a moment Judo had reluctantly accepted. Now, staring at Jian's unnatural recovery, he reached his limit. His transformation took full effect, his body erupting into pure magma. The mountain beneath them cracked, the terrain warping under the extreme heat. Nearby hunters, including an ice-wielding woman named Hanam, struggled to contain the devastation. Jian, however, remained unmoved, walking forward despite his body catching fire. Judo summoned more magma, intensifying the destruction. The mountain itself threatened to collapse into a volcanic eruption. Hunters fled, leaving only Judo standing amidst the chaos. Jian, now fully engulfed in flames, finally sank into the molten earth. Judo turned to Hanam, commanding her to freeze the surface. She obeyed, sealing the lava in a thick layer of ice. With a sense of finality, Judo declared the battle over. Jian had been buried for good. Meanwhile, back in South Korea, a healer worked on a hunter who had previously survived an encounter with Jian. Despite his severe wounds, the hunter suddenly awoke, a clear sign that the conflict was far from over. As the situation in Japan stabilized, Judo addressed his remaining subordinates. Only the strongest were permitted to stay. The rest would be discarded. There were no objections. Then, without warning, the ice covering the lava shattered. A skeletal hand burst through, followed by the rest of Jian's body emerging from beneath the hardened magma. He brushed off the remnants of fire, unaffected by what had been considered a certain death sentence. While others had feared the lava, for him, it had been nothing more than an inconvenience. Memories resurfaced, painful recollections of being trapped in the Bloodgate, enduring endless torment from monsters. Though the fire had not destroyed him, it had left its mark. Yet compared to what he had already survived, this had been insignificant. For those unfamiliar, this version of the story altered Jian's origins. Previously, he had been depicted as being trapped underground, his suffering tied to thorny vines that fueled his need for revenge. Some might prefer that original interpretation, but regardless of the version, one thing remained certain. The fight was not over. The suffocating heat pressed against my skin as I clawed my way out of the hardened lava. Every movement burned, but I forced myself forward, breaking free from the molten prison that had nearly consumed me. When I finally emerged, I saw Hanam standing there, frozen in shock. Her wide eyes locked onto mine as if she were staring at something that had crawled out of hell. Above us, the Prime Minister took in the situation with grim understanding. Without hesitation, he turned to Hanam. "Gather the hunters," he ordered. "Take them to safety." Hanam hesitated, glancing at me once more. She understood why the Prime Minister was so concerned. Before she could say anything, he leaped into the volcano, landing in front of me with a force that cracked the very ground beneath him. I braced myself, watching him closely. Hanam's voice echoed in my mind, a memory of her pleading with him. "You push yourself too hard," she had warned. "Your magma powers have limits." The Prime Minister had merely smiled, his determination unwavering. "Japan is the weakest of the four great nations. If we don't take control of South Korea, we won't survive. I will do whatever it takes, even if it means sacrificing myself. Now, in the present, his words carried weight as he struck the ground with such force that I was thrown backward. Before I could recover, he was already upon me, his fist crashing into me with devastating power, slamming me against the volcano wall. He didn't stop there. He kept coming, each attack more brutal than the last. I barely had time to react before a wave of fire engulfed me, searing away my hands and hurling me across the battlefield. As my body attempted to heal, the Prime Minister launched himself into the air and came down like a meteor, shaking the entire mountain. Meanwhile, Hanam had gathered the hunters. The Prime Minister ordered us to leave, she told them, but they refused. "We owe too much to him," one of them said. "We won't abandon him now." Another hunter smirked. "Besides, aren't you basically his wife?" Hanam ignored the comment, her concern fixed on the battle. I struggled to my feet, my body reforming as I reached for Hanam. The moment my freezing hand closed around hers, I pulled her into the volcano with me. The hunters leaped after us in an attempt to save her. The Prime Minister tried to shield Hanam, slashing at me and severing my arm, but in one swift motion, I took his head. Hanam had no choice. She froze the severed head before it could reattach. The other hunters shattered my frozen body into pieces, believing the battle was over. They were wrong. Hanam ran toward the Prime Minister, her hands trembling. Tears fell as she realized what she had done. She had frozen her husband's head. Then I crushed it. A heavy silence fell over them before the horror set in. Their despair turned to rage, and they threw themselves at me. It didn't matter. I killed them all. Hanam stood before me, her eyes empty. Without a word, she let the ice consume her body, choosing to end her life rather than face what had happened. I climbed out of the volcano, the sole survivor. In Korea, Tasu trained relentlessly, his mind filled with vengeance. His hands glowed with red mana stones as he pushed himself beyond his limits. A dishwasher, exhausted and drained, warned him to stop, but he ignored her. He remembered what I had done, how I had killed his friends. He swore he would grow stronger, no matter the cost. "Break the seal," he ordered. The woman gasped for breath but nodded. When the seal shattered, she barely remained standing. "You can use your full powers now," she whispered. Tasu wasted no time. He gathered the Juman Guild members, standing before them as they bowed their heads in respect. Many were shocked to see him alive, but they were ready to follow him. Han Kong-chan, the intelligence head, reported my movements, but Tasu didn't let him finish. "Kill Jiang immediately," he commanded. Before anyone could react, Tasu severed Kei-chan's head and held it up. He was once the vice president of the Korean Hunter Association. Tasu said coldly. "Jiang only rose to power because this guild took control of the association 3 years ago." Then, with ruthless efficiency, he twisted another hunter's limbs until his body exploded. Blood painted the room as he unleashed a massacre, killing all 1,528 members of the guild to absorb their powers. The sheer energy made him unstable, but he refused to stop. The dishwasher, horrified, pleaded with him. "Why are you doing this?" Tasu met her gaze. "Jiang killed the Japanese Prime Minister. Even after taking all this power, it might not be enough. I need more." His eyes gleamed with madness. "I'm going to Russia." At the port, a woman greeted me warmly as I stepped out of the gate. Meanwhile, at the hospital, my mother lay unconscious. Yin, the Korean Association president, used her S-rank healing to repair her damaged cells. But it was draining her mana dangerously fast. One night, after a session, she collapsed. I caught her as she fell. "Why are you doing this?" I asked. She grasped my hand. "You must survive." I felt a strange energy between us. Green light flickered, and I pulled away, realizing the truth. My monsterification had advanced too far. Since the first blood gates appeared 15 years ago, all gates have begun turning into blood gates, she explained. Your escape has made this change happen faster. The mana from these gates is flowing into you. Something darker is searching for you. As if to prove her point, chaos erupted outside. Red gates opened across the city, unleashing monstrous horrors. The South Korean president declared martial law, refusing international aid. Guilds fought back but were quickly slaughtered. Watching from a distance, I wondered if I was the cause of this disaster. When I saw a little girl about to be crushed, I didn't hesitate. I tore through the monster, saving her. Yin observed me, understanding my silent resolve. Memories of my suffering in the Bloodgate resurfaced. I had fought these creatures endlessly for 5 years. Frustration boiled over, and I ripped another monster apart, shouting for them to leave me alone. A world away, in a realm of bones, a skeletal figure stirred. Is Ji Young the one who caused the crack? Meanwhile, I vowed to kill every monster. Heal my mother, I told Yin. Keep her safe. As I fought, I realized these monsters were the same ones from the Bloodgate. The waves would eventually stop, or so I thought. A sharp pain pierced my head. I screamed. Soldiers arrived, tanks rolling in. He's the cause of all this, their commander shouted. Kill him, I tried to explain. I've only killed monsters. They didn't listen. Shells tore my body apart. I begged them to stop. Blood streamed down my face. When I blinked, the soldiers were dead, shredded to pieces. A woman beside me whispered, Another gate is opening. Your monsterification is spreading. My past flashed before me. Tasu had bullied me, and my only friend had suffered for it. That friend had lost his right eye and his power. He had begged me not to seek revenge, but now that same friend's severed head was skewered on my bone sword.